That's a fucking pot noodle with hot water. That's it. That is the traditional Polish delicacy right there. Oh my god, it looks so good. Look at that premium cut. It just looks like a sad pasta.
But since I travelled over to Warsaw and interviewed the devs of Darkwood, I actually ended up trying it. And I would actually like to officially retract my awful, hurtful lies and confirm that it actually is pretty peak. I do actually kind of get the meme now about British food having absolutely no flavour and being just horrible. After obtaining the delicacy, you can interact with some more appliances around the apartment, like the bathtub. I'm barely standing on my feet. I'll take a bath tomorrow. Or the washing machine. The Frania washing machine. I spent 2 days in the queue to get it. You can even wash your hands in the sink. Probably should have done that before eating the soup. To get the bedroom key, you'll have to visit your living room. Inside, you'll meet the best part of the entire game and what your whole journey has been building up for. Your dog, Surek. You can even pet him. Look at that, so wholesome. Just ignore the fact that he uses the exact same model of the dogs that you beat to death in Chapter 1. You can examine and search the TV that back in the apartment dream played Teddy Drop Ear. A black and white Reuben, a real luxury. Unfortunately, it's broken. Inside, there's a flashlight and a battery, but it's not like you'll need those anymore. The wardrobe next to the TV has some fabrics, probably just blankets to put over the sofas. Although if you try and sleep on one of them, the protagonist will refuse. I'm very tired. I prefer to lie down in a regular bed. One thing to actually note here, all of your inventory is now inaccessible, so if you take anything from the wardrobes, you won't actually be able to use it. This is probably to stop people just pulling out their AK and gunning everyone down. In the corner wardrobe is the key you need to finally enter the bedroom. If there's nothing more on your mind, then finally laying down and taking your long-awaited rest. It's my bed. The white crumpled sheets look as if I've just woken up, at last. I feel my sore legs buckling underneath me, my body becoming heavy and overwhelmingly lethargic. It was a grueling journey, days of human torment. Cool side note here, the game will actually track how many nights you spent in the Darkwood, showing it as basically a stat screen on here. You can choose to go to sleep. There's no one to stop you anymore. You're home. You're safe. After all the suffering you've endured, and definitely inflicted onto others, you can rest. A sedating warmth washes over me, a warmth of security and happiness. The camera pans out, and that's it. You've done it. There's some text scrolling by, talking about the fates of characters you left behind. But other than that, it really is the end of the game. You escaped the forest. You didn't get the answers you wanted, but at least you're out. You're finally free. But it feels like there's still more to be found. It feels unsatisfying leaving the forest like this. So many questions are left unanswered. I know the protagonist is tired, but why would he go straight to bed instead of, I don't know, contacting the authorities or someone to let them know what's happening? Surely there's something deeper still left inside the woods. Going back all the way to your first meeting with the doctor in Chapter 2, he mentions some more water tunnels that he couldn't get through. But if you fix the compressor and filled up an oxygen tank, you'll be able to access these areas. Following his directions, you'll eventually stumble upon a water tunnel leading to a wreckage of a helicopter. It must have been surveying the forest and crashed here. Though it's unclear if that was the forest's doing or rather just an accident. There are roots growing all over the wreckage, but to be fair, they're basically in every single environment we've been in. And because how rapid the growth is, you really can't tell if this crash was recent or months ago. Off to the side, you can find a dead body, presumably belonging to a soldier. He's holding an assault rifle and a magazine for it. Although at this point in the game, you probably won't get too much use out of it. You can enter the crashed helicopter through a crack in its hull. Inside, you'll see some more corpses. One holding some common loot, and the other holding a photo. A photo of the doctor.
It's torn in half, but you might remember another photo that was torn in half all the way back in the train wreck. Back then, we assumed that it was the doctor's family, and now we're probably right. Combining the two torn photos together, it definitely does match. This helicopter might have even been one sent by the military to exfil the doctor, because he was basically the only person in the region with any medical expertise. And even though he didn't know how to treat the plague, he definitely would have heavily studied it, much more than any of the outsiders.
One possible theory is that because the corpse is holding the photo, it could be that it was actually his family in the helicopter that went looking for him. Or she passed a photo onto a rescue team so they could recognize the doctor and pull him out. Again, it's nothing concrete, but it's still something to consider. Also, an important thing to mention is that the helicopter has the Air Force checkerboard on it, meaning it belonged to the Polish Air Force. It might seem like a pretty insignificant detail, but this pretty much confirms that the outsider group we've been talking about all this time was actually headed by the Polish government, instead of being, for example, a private splinter group. There's nothing more to be found in the wreckage, but there's still one more water tunnel to explore, either by following the doctor's general directions again, or by finding a map all the way back in the swamp village. You'll be able to find the burned cottage. It always spawns near the village, so it's pretty easy to find. Entering the tunnel, you'll emerge right in front of 3 crosses. The burned cottage is even marked by 3 crosses on your map, showing just how characteristic they are to this location. Inspecting them will have the protagonist read the inscription, an old, simple wooden cross covered in inscriptions. I can still decipher one of them. May you never know hunger again. Getting out of the water will also cause him to comment. Some skeletons have been pushed out by the water and are now lying in the mud.
Now, this was probably the old village graveyard, but it's been so washed up it's hard to even tell anymore, apart from a couple of gravestones. The inscription on the crosses could even be hinting at the hunger that destroyed the entire village, or even created the talking tree.
Exploring the cottage, you can find 2 photos, one depicting a group of people walking on a road in the middle of the village, while the other shows a helicopter flying over a burning building. The helicopter looks similar to the wreckage, but there's nothing really confirming this link. Once you pick up the first photo, a human spider will spawn in the entrance room and attack you. According to the wiki, it's supposed to talk to you, but in my run, I just fed it a buckshot as soon as I saw it. Look, I'll be honest, there's enough dialogue in this game. I don't need one of the enemies to give me a lore dump about his wife's son. But if you're interested, the dialogue that it's supposed to say goes like this.
You've torn us apart, burned our houses, locked us in here, sentenced us to in the woods.
Killing it, you can get the key to the burned cottage. Since the human spider was holding the key, it could mean that it used to be the previous inhabitant of this cottage. As human spiders look like amalgamations of dead bodies, it could be possible that the forest actually uses the corpses from the graveyard to create them. This spider specifically shows semblance of remembering its past life, talking about how it was condemned to stay in the forest. This seems to be a really common theme with characters remembering or failing to remember past parts of their life. That, or this is the forest fucking with us for the 20th time. It's also interesting that when speaking to the protagonist, it talks like we were responsible for burning down the house. We've heard before of the outsiders burning down houses to slow the spread of infection, so it does make sense. It could even mean that the helicopter in one of the photos was responsible for setting the fire. If so, then it explains how the outsiders could burn all these buildings around the forest without exposing themselves to the infection inside. Apart from these 2 locations, there are no more underwater tunnels to visit. But there is one more important place to check out that we haven't properly had time to explore since we were trying so desperately to get out. The radio tower. There were a couple of mentions before, like if you entered the snail's cottage and found the notes, the protagonist even mentioned it might still be emitting signals in the journal. Not only that, but the old journal from the elephant's shed also hinted at a possible second exit as an alternative to burning down the talking tree. Even though we already found a way out, this might at least show us some more of the areas surrounding the swamp. First, approaching the radio tower, you might see a slimy trail on the ground. It looks like this is where the snail was led to by the voice. Maybe the radio tower really is the source. It would explain why the forest can speak to us through the radio back at the hideout, as well as the strange transmissions described in the note I mentioned earlier. Before even going into the radio tower, if you stayed around the swamp for a long time, and I mean a really long time, which from my experience took around 20 in-game days to spawn in, you can find a small campsite near the entrance. You can search the campfire to find some paper scraps, and there's a burnt map. The map is unreadable. I can see some kind of drawing in the corner. Is it a combine? No, not the Half-Life combine. A combine harvester. There's also another note. A torn page from a journal. Your journal. Boredom. The news was pure garbage as always. I was only waiting for the Sports Digest. We won 2-1. I watched Plastishowy Pimentik before going to sleep. Boring life on leave. In 1 week, I will walk into the woods. It will be my 6th time. This time, we're going in from the west. The trip will be exceptionally long. We're taking one of the longest tunnels. It almost reaches to the last zone. Supposedly, it's starting to give under the pressure of the roots, but the job is urgent, so fuck safety. I have no idea how any of this is kept under wraps. Are those poor saps unaware of the fact that we're taking trips under their feet? Maybe they like it here so much they don't really care? I wouldn't be surprised. This is the first page of your journal that the doctor ripped out when he found you and interrogated you. It's worth mentioning that this camp only appears if you got an appointment with the doctor and then failed the dream sequence. It's basically an alternate path the doctor takes if he travels alone instead of teaming up with you. Reading through the journal page is a stark contrast to the notes we've been making all throughout the game. At this point, the protagonist would give anything to go back to the ever so boring life on leave. It also seems like this expedition was deemed risky all the way from the start, with even the protagonist acknowledging that the bunker tunnel was starting to give under the pressure of the roots. Whatever mission we had, though, was deemed more important, though it obviously stopped mattering after we got stranded here. Interestingly, this note also shows the outsider perspective on the people stuck living inside Darkwood. The protagonists seem to think that the people stuck here liked living in the forest, thinking that they were unaware of the outsiders walking beneath them. This comment might also be why the doctor hates the protagonist so much. After all, he's been stuck here for years trying to escape, and this random outsider he found is snarling on him and the rest of the villagers that are suffering, all while he's failed to save any of them. Also, another real-life reference, that show that the protagonist watched, Plastiszowy Pamiętnik, that's actually a real-life children's show that was released back in the 80s. By looking at a couple of videos, I guess it's just the Polish version of Morph. I mean, they're both weird orange characters made out of Play-Doh, so kind of makes sense. So this is the doctor's camp. If you need any more confirmation, you can even find his old camera in a sack next to the campfire. The same camera you could find in the prologue, although now it's covered in mud. We know from the Elephant Mom's dialogue that even in this path, he's also slowly going insane. So he's probably mid-savage transformation, hence the mud. Although he still seems to have some purpose, setting up camp near the radio tower, it could be the forest calling him here just like it did to the snail. Or maybe he's looking for a way out of the forest, just like the old shed journal mentioned. He's still sane enough to set up a proper camp too, even making a primitive bed. Unfortunately though, you can't find him here. Although looking at the burnt map, you might see a clue as to where he might be. That Combine drawing is actually a location you can find inside the forest. Normally, when you find it, you won't even know that there's anything interesting here. You won't even get it marked on your map. It looks like a solid wall of trees with a combine harvester stuck inside. But if you survive a few more days, the protagonist will make a remark when you get close. I can notice some kind of passage under the roots entwining the wreckage. Funnily enough, if you paid attention to the map earlier, it literally had the passage marked on it. Going through, you find yourself in a small space between the trees and kept completely in the dark thanks to the leaves blocking all light. There's a ravine separating the path you came through from the rest of the space. Looking at the other side, you can see the campfire and a familiar figure.
Don't cry. I'll be there soon. I'm close. I'm so very close. Don't cry.
To make your way over to his side, you'll have to cross a fallen log. Normally, if you manage to find your way here by complete accident, this area would be crawling with banshees. Fortunately, right now, it looks like only the doctor is present, so you won't be swarmed yet. Approaching the camp, your character will identify the person on the ground. I think it's the doctor. Getting any closer will have him wake up from his stupor and immediately recognize you.
It's you.
He crawls away a bit.
Go away. You hear me?
Just to grab a branch and set it on fire, waving it in front of him like he's scaring off an animal.
Leave me alone. She needs me.
He's despised you even before he went insane, but now he's trying to protect the voice, so getting any closer will have him lunge at you. Despite his demented state, he's actually a pretty strong opponent, having much faster attacks than a normal stick savage. He's gone into an enraged frenzy, trying to kill us by any means necessary just to help that voice. Once you manage to hit him enough times, he'll fall down with a leg wound and missing an arm, and he'll start crawling away. But just because he's down doesn't mean he's dead, because trying to get close to him, he'll still keep trying to whack you with his staff. Instead of finishing him off, you can check out the glowing spot near the campfire, looking like a shiny stone. Examining it will have the doctor scream at you.
Leave that alone!
It's a figurine made out of mud, with a shiny stone inserted into its head, which you can remove. Here, you're given the option to leave the doctor to rot away on his own. But at this point, you might as well put him out of his misery. Looting his corpse afterwards gives you maybe the biggest lore dump in the entire game, in the form of 6 pages of his notes, written on the same notepad that we could find as the Doctor in the prologue. They start around the time the train wreck sequence happens, with the first note being a direct follow-up.
The fucker showed me the exit finally. Entrance behind the wardrobe. I was there, in the cottage. This is where the voice was coming from. I wasn't mistaken. How could I have missed it? The tunnel. Those village idiots would happily feed me to the woods, but I still couldn't close those fucking doors in the tunnels. They've suffered enough. Unfortunately, this means I'll also have to look out for the rat. He will come after me. That bastard. I'm sure of it. I should have killed him when he was lying in the cart helpless.
Funnily enough, the Doctor seems to be marking his entries with titles similarly to how the protagonist does in his journal, showing that despite his hatred for us, the Doctor is still picking up on our behaviors. This note also confirms that the voice speaking to the Doctor was always present in some form, only getting stronger and fully turning the Doctor insane once he crossed into the swamp. It seems like it was guiding him here all along, probably because whatever is behind the voice has much stronger influence here. On the bottom of the page is a mutated insect, with a note next to it with the Doctor's attempts at identifying it as Rhiparochromis vulgaris, a real-life species of seed bug. Honestly, I have no idea about the implications of this. I have a feeling that the devs just wanted to include a cool bug that they found. The next note was made around the time the Doctor first entered the swamp.
The swamp. I was hoping this damn stinking hole would lead me to the exit. Unfortunately, the roots have been broken through the tunnel walls and blocked the passage. However, I feel I'm getting more closer. I can hear her more clearly. The rat's hideout. I searched the cottage. I found some weird devices connected to the oven. Locals don't use such equipment. Rats must have made a hideout out of it. I'm sure of it. Apart from the oven, I've also found a broken compressor. Looks like they are using oxygen tanks when traversing the woods. I need to leave this house as soon as possible.
He's following the same sequence of events we did when we first arrived here. There's nothing really interesting in this note, aside from the mention of the voice getting more clear once the Doctor ends up in the swamp, and his interaction with the oven. It's kind of funny seeing the Doctor find the only reason we can survive at night just to call it weird and leave. Aside from that, you can also see some camera film attached to the note, probably coming from the Zenit camera we found muddied in his radio tower camp. In the next note, he's already starting to sound more deranged, once again emphasizing the voices in his head.
Whispers. Whispers in the radio. Whispers in my head. Louder than usual. I feel I'm close now. I've seen him. He's back to his place. I took a photo of the motherfucker. Village. I remember this place vaguely. I haven't been here in ages. Everything is flooded and overgrown. But I remember the shrine and the cottages. Used to come here to treat people. The tree in this village must have grown no later than 5 years ago, when the forest blocked me from this place.
He's even drawing symbols on the page, similar to the ones savages would mark everywhere. This one feels like it's supposed to supplement the meeting we had with him in the village in the other path. The devs, obviously just making sure we don't miss out on delicious, tasty, scrumptious lore. After this note, the other ones are basically just insane ramblings.
I can hear you cry, but I don't know where it's coming from. Tell me where to go. Don't cry. I'm close. Please, don't cry. I'm close. Are you behind the trees?
The fact that the voice is crying seems to give more strength to the theory that the Doctor is hearing his daughter's voice, trying to comfort her by saying that he's close. It would make sense, as he's been obsessed with getting back to his family for a long time. The voice taking on this form would make it easier to manipulate him and drive him insane. The notes after this one probably happen around the time we would see his last transformation, where the Doctor becomes a full-blown savage, with sticks and mud covering most of the pages.
An old combine. A chasm. Is it here? It's here. I don't know. The trees are singing. Or maybe it's a cry. Is it coming from under the ground? I think it's here. This cry. I know this cry.
He seems to think the voice is coming from here, but apart from the banshees, there's nothing to be found. The last note is completely covered in what looks like an idol, probably depicting the same thing that the shiny figurine did, with the only visible writing being,
Is it you? Is it you? Is it you?
This is written multiple times. There's no deep lore analysis here, he's just completely gone insane. I don't even blame him. If I had to survive this long in Poland, I probably would have lost it too. That wraps up pretty much the entirety of the Doctor's arc, but Later on, we might see him for one final time. Coming back to the radio tower after closing off with the doctor, going through the corridor carved between the trees, you'll end up right outside the tower's building. Unfortunately, it's never that easy, and your path is blocked by a singular crate held up by a growth. So unfortunately for you, you're gonna have to take the long way round. Oh boy. I sure hope there's nothing dangerous inside. Following the path, you'll first see some destroyed fencing and a corpse. The fence has been torn to shreds. There's an empty nest nearby, probably belonging to whatever tore through that fence. You can also see the overturned radio tower here, which you might recognize way back from the visions you had at the markings strewn across the map. Seems like you've been pointed here by the woods all along. Even the talking tree had one of the people mouth the word radio at you, although back then it was basically impossible to connect it to the tower. It's important to mention that just like all the other locations, the game does a fantastic job setting the atmosphere here. Walking in, and you'll immediately start hearing the metal tower creaking, like it's about to collapse under its own weight. This small design choice does an insane job of evoking a sense of abandonment, like the tower has outlived everyone around it. On the other side of the tower, you'll see what that nest belonged to. It's dozens of banshee babies. What's worse is if you freed the snail, you've made the game harder for yourself. As you can see his broken shell lying past the banshee nest. He probably tried to enter the radio tower like you're doing, but ended up being swarmed by banshees, basically becoming the equivalent of a Polish KFC meal. Thankfully, the banshees won't attack you immediately. They're sleeping, but any noise can wake them up. Meaning, unless you want to get body blocked to death, you might want to reconsider using firearms for now. To be fair though, they're not like the chompers in the Great Lakes, so you can actually use your flashlight here. Seriously, you can just spam it in their face and they just don't care. An interesting thing you can pick up on is that the banshees or their babies never seem to show up anywhere with natural light. The only places we ever see them are night during specific events. When we do see them outside night events, it's always somewhere obscured from sunlight, which means if anything, these creatures are nocturnal. It's kind of telling that these things that avoid the sun are also triggered when you look directly at them. It's almost like they never want to be seen. Looking past the banshee nest, you'll realize that, yep, once again, you are punished for trying to take the good moral choice. Because if you freed the snail, not only he dies here anyway, but now his shell is blocking the way forward. So you'll have to try and path around it instead of just taking the shortest path. Again, we can still get inside the radio tower, but we've made it a lot harder for ourselves. Although even the quote-unquote short path is completely filled with banshee nests, moving through here without accidentally looking at a banshee and getting yourself swarmed is basically impossible because of how tight the corridors are. Combined with the entire area being enveloped in pretty much complete darkness, meaning you can trigger a banshee without even seeing her. Even better, if you manage to brush against a single banshee baby by complete accident, it will instantly wake up, forcing you into a combat scenario where you'll probably bump into another one, and then another one, until you create a chain reaction where you end up waking up the entire bird population. Really, the only saving grace is how little damage they do when they hit you, so you can just pop an alcohol bandage and basically out-heal most of the hits. Oh yeah, and also, like I said earlier, the Molotov. Don't forget about the Molotov. Again, it's kind of funny how banshees seem to hate light, and fire is one of the best weapons against them. After moving through the nests, you'll have to enter one of the buildings to progress. Going inside, like pretty much every single building in the entire game, it's completely ruined, having giant gaping holes in the roof and the aforementioned tower collapsing in on itself. And of course, being home to even more banshees. I found an old overturned radio tower. The civilian radio equipment still works. Strange. That radio equipment he mentions can be found in the next room, connected to a network of roots. This basically proves that the forest has been manipulating the radio waves, as there's no way that these radios would still be working while everything around was destroyed. Being able to manipulate radio signals suggests a high level of intelligence in whatever is behind the darkwood. But then again, it did make an entire forest just to fuck with some villagers, so, you know, nothing concrete there. Unfortunately, there's no sign of an exit in the building, but there is a journal to pick up. Right behind that small room with a banshee that'll jump scare you immediately as you open the door. So even if you stealthed your way through the entire map, you've now given your exact coordinates to every single banshee in the radio tower. 100% completely fair design. Actually, you know what? You know how I said at the beginning of the video, like the game is so great for having no jump scares? Nah, I take it all back. Anyway, once you make it past, you can find a crate with some ammo and an old cassette, as well as a backpack with a note inside it.
We haven't slept again. Another madman came here at night, the second one this month. He jumped over the fence and tried to ram the door with his head, shot him in the ass with a tranquilizer, and today, we're going to transport him outside. Since that accursed tree appeared in the village, an increasing number of savages roam our hideouts. How do they know about us? They're psychos, they can barely talk. The villagers in our sector still have no clue what's going on. It's been 10 years or so. But when they lose it, all they need to do is go out into the woods and put some mud on their face and they come sniffing. Stefan told me that in the neighboring sector, the wild ones appear mainly in the vicinity of their hideout, located near the tunnel entrance. I don't think it's a coincidence.
This is a pretty big reveal, as it confirms that there must be some form of intelligence behind the forest, controlling the savages and using the radios to communicate with us. In fact, we've seen this communication already, in the signs they draw on the ground. The hallucinations we got when we stepped inside led us to the same places it led the savages. In Chapter 1, it was Bunker 21, and in the swamp, it was the radio tower. This communication also seems to somehow be connected to the talking tree, as its appearance seems to have made savages more aware of the hideouts, which also ends up affecting us as we're stuck defending against them at night. Once you finish the reading material, you can move on through the rest of the building, just to realize you have to again go outside into another fucking banshee nest. Truly the bravest of video game design. Or you can actually take an alternate path. Right before that bullshit jump scare banshee, there's an eye growth in the corner of the room. Activating it and backtracking to the open area before you enter the building. A passage now opens in the middle of the collapsed tower. Of course, there's another banshee as well. But surprisingly, this one isn't actually hostile. It kind of sounds like it's crying, standing over the corpse of one of its babies.
Stop fucking crying, bitch!
If anything, it's one of the first humanizing moments of any of the forest's creations in the entire game, which feels kind of weird considering they all look like they were created just to kill. But again, maybe there's something deeper here. Maybe they aren't all mindless predators, instead leading actual, albeit incredibly twisted from our point of view, normal lives.
I have to go to work.
Continuing on the path will lead you to a small hidden area. The first thing you see are more of the savages' drawings, but instead of random circles, this time it's a clear drawing of the bunker door. It even looks kind of similar to the visions we had of the door back in Chapter 1. So again, this could be another inspiration from the forest. It's kind of weird seeing it here though, considering no one in the swamp would even know about it. If anything, it feels like it was left here for you. You were the one that was meant to find it. I mean, to be fair, that door did mean so much to you. It was basically your only way to escape. Looking around, you'll also see that this is where the base of the tower is. And of course, it's all entwined with roots, which is pretty much what caused it to collapse. You can actually go under the tower here to find a small roofed area with 3 graves under it. Behind the graves, there's a sack containing mushrooms, and also a charcoal drawing of the bunker door, and even another iron cowbell, the same one that you could find back in the tunnels. This, of course, is a callback to the 3, although I'm not really sure why they have graves prepared here. It could be that they made them themselves as some sort of offering to the forest, which could also be a reference to the dream where we were told to lay down in a grave. It would also suggest that the 3 are aware of Bunker 21. They're probably the ones to make that drawing on the ground earlier. I don't really see why it would interest them though, as that door only leads deeper into the woods. There's one more thing to find here. Behind the graves is another corpse consumed by roots, laying on top of the savage ritual circles, with bird corpses strewn on top of it, just like the corpses in the markings you could find in the rest of the swamp representing all of the different enemies. But this one represents the banshees. It's also probably why their presence is so heavy here, and considering that this area seems so heavily connected to the 3, it's possible that they were the ones responsible for this ritual. So technically, if their father wasn't a thieving dipshit, we probably never would have had to fight a single banshee. Now, instead of pathing back through the building and into that banshee nest, you can take a shortcut right before the door to the other part of the building. The first thing you'll notice is a mountain of corpses piling up against the wall, presumably savages, drawn here just like it was said in the earlier note. There's also one savage still alive, banging his head against the metal door. Killing him, you can now approach it, just to realize it's locked with a code that you don't have. At this point, you might expect another hour-long section where I talk about a side quest that ends up taking you halfway across the map for a single item. But fortunately, this time, we're actually spared by the protagonist. I think I remember the code to this door. 8684. Thankfully, like we've established, the protagonist is an outsider and he still has some tricks up his sleeve. This radio tower must have been secured by the outsiders, otherwise the protagonist wouldn't have known the code. Walking in, you can see more heavily overgrown radio equipment, but the interesting part is that there's another underground entrance here, the entrance to the underground tunnels. Going inside, you'll be thrown into a familiar environment, feeling almost like a continuation of the tunnel behind the bunker door. In fact, going left, you can see a blocked section. The further path of this tunnel is blocked by roots and rubble. which is likely the very same block we encountered back before we had to detour into the swamp. There's also a crate next to the entrance you can unlock, containing a military flashlight and a note.
22:15 hours. 2 people came via the tunnels after the hideout near Village 3C. They were attacked. 23:10 hours. The hideout near Village 3C has been compromised. At least 12 locals have entered the hideout cellar, mostly mud-covered savages. 3 among them were wearing unusual clothing, weird rags. We lost 1 man, the door to the tunnels has been shut, and none of the locals managed to break through further. We're getting ready for evac. 01:30 hours, evac successful. The door is locked with a code, we're going home.
The hideout mentioned is the one we've been staying at during our time in the swamp. This explains why the outsiders had to abandon the swamp entirely, as their hideout was being overrun by savages and were seemingly aware of the tunnel entrance. What's interesting is another mention of the 3, which also explains that cowbell we found in the tunnel right behind the area restricted door. This might also tie into that drawing of the bunker door we found in the area near the base of the tower. The forest might have been influencing the 3 to try and open the bunker door, effectively flooding the tunnels with savages from both areas. Now, you might find it weird that the 3 were leading the attacks that ultimately caused the outsider evacuation, since to us, the player, they've only been helpful acting as a trader. But you have to remember, we've become part of the forest ever since we injected ourselves with essence for the first time. And even if you didn't level up once in the entire game, there's still a canon event in the beginning of the game where the doctor forces an injection onto you. It might be possible that the 3 know this somehow. After all, they're clearly much smarter than regular savages. The closing of the tunnel door was probably the reason why so many savages piled up against the radio tower and stopped attacking the hideout at night. We already established that the forest communicates with them.
Haven't you figured out I don't speak your fucking language?
Once that door got closed and the area was locked off, the radio tunnel entrance was the only other way out of the region. In fact, if the forest wanted to spread the plague further, it would need to get access to this hatch, locked behind a giant metal door. I do want to give a quick shout out to this metal door though. It managed to survive 2 entire years with no maintenance and literally hundreds of savages beating their heads against it, practically saving the world from the plague possibly spreading even further. So we're not the goat of Darkwood. It's this door. Now, you might ask, why does the forest not just send a stronger enemy than a malnourished, insane human? Is it stupid? I mean, surely a couple of chompers would probably take care of that door easily. Well, this could be a bit of a plot hole, or we can assume that all the other creatures aren't under the forest's direct control. The savages are the closest thing to an actual human in the game. There's still some consciousness inside them, meaning they can be influenced to do things, even after going completely insane. All the other enemies, which seem to come directly from the forest or from infected corpses, like for example chompers, act more like animals with no agency other than instinct. There is of course the banshee, which was actually showing some emotion, but to be fair, small bird wings, they're not really gonna do much against a metal door. I can't believe I've spent this section of the video just glazing a metal door. There's also the issue of the protagonist knowing the code. I did mention earlier, and while he could have been a part of that evacuation, I think it's more likely that the code was given to operatives if they needed an emergency exfil point, or maybe in case they ever needed to come back into the swamp again. This might just be me coping, but I like to think the devs had it all thought out, and this really does make sense. Coming back to the tunnels, you can finally continue the journey you started all the way back in chapter 1. And just like how you were warned before opening the bunker door, the protagonist again remarks how there's no coming back. This may be a one-way road. Yep, I know last time I did that, it was a tease for another chapter, but please, I promise I am not doing another fake out. I really am trying to keep this video under 10 hours. Eventually, you'll end up in front of a metal door, which will prompt the protagonist to make another note in the journal. I found a floodgate in the tunnel. I'm afraid I will only have one shot of getting further down the passage. I feel like it will lead me to the right place. You can't open the floodgate unless you lock the door you just came through, which means you have to effectively lock yourself in and hope that there really is an exit at the end of the tunnel. Going through leads you to yet another door. This one is blocked from the other side. Trying to take the side tunnel won't take you anywhere either, as the only thing there is a gaping maw. You can look inside it to get a piece of odd meat, and after you walk away, it speaks to you. Now, the last thing to try here is a metal lever overgrown with fungus. To use it, you have to get rid of the growths by hitting them with your shovel, just like how you solved pretty much every other problem in the game. But doing so causes the mushrooms to burst, releasing spores into the air and putting you into another dream sequence. You wake up right where you got knocked unconscious. But the tunnels seem different. The lever is gone, and the floodgate is locked shut behind you. The door leading deeper in is still barricaded. But what used to be that dead-end side tunnel now expands into a nicely paved walkway. The only item you have now is a military flashlight, which seems to run on the dream logic of infinite battery power. But other than being able to see, you're once again completely defenseless. I can hear someone calling incomprehensibly from the depths of a corridor. Following the source of the voice, you'll stumble into a larger chamber with the words "Come to me" scratched out in Polish on the ground. There's also shiny stones on the ground, one here and one more in the following cave. These mark your way forward. And trust me, if you stray off this path, you are going to get punished hard. More writing on the floor. The forest is calling you. Not seeing a shiny stone, you might take the wrong corridor. You'll see a bed you might recognize just to hear a voice behind you.
Are you lost?
A half-dead man with pale, withered skin, hollow eyes, and teeth black as night. Sounds very familiar. Hopefully, it won't stay familiar for long. More walking. More walking. More writing. It all says the same. Come to me. This time, there's also a tree in the middle of the room with bloodied fragments of cloth stuck to it. Taking the wrong path reminds you of life before Darkwood. Simple furniture from your old apartment, and a madman in the corner telling you that that's not where you're going.
I think you've lost your way, buddy boy.
More shiny stones. Another split-off path. But this time, instead of your apartment, it's just a large chamber.
What do you think you're doing here?
Once again, a voice calls out behind you.
Got lost, poor fella.
Just for another one to speak when you turn to face it. Instead of corpses or madmen, these are villagers. Villagers who, in some way, you probably condemned to death. Instead of them disappearing peacefully, you can hear a shrill scream in a tunnel at the end of the chamber. Turning around to run away, you remember there's never just one enemy in the woods. Trying to evade the spiders, you come across a familiar sight. Puddles of water, forming right up until a large door. You come out of Bunker 21. It was never the way out. You follow the corridor, but instead of leading to the surface, you arrive where it all began. The doctor's interrogation room. The tunnel behind you turns into a wall, but you already know what to do. You walk into the big house. Banshees scream outside the windows. You won't be alone here for long. Just like you remember, you need to go into the room behind the wardrobe just to see yourself strapped to a surgery table. You won't give in to the Darkwood's tricks. Not anymore. You take the table leg from the crate, your very first real weapon. It feels reassuring to be able to defend yourself. Right until you hear the growling outside the barricades. Preparing for combat is futile. Even with a weapon, you basically stand no chance. Once again, running away really is the better option. A chomper breaks through the door, keeping Yannick locked, his corpse following behind. This is your chance. Dodging attacks, you make it through and jump out of the window. You pass through the doctor's old clinic. The constant growling follows close. You run until you reach a metal door. It's stuck. Just when you think it's over, the growling goes quiet. You push open the door with the table leg. You exit into an area even more overgrown than what you've ever seen before. The forest pulsates around you, beating almost like it has a heart. You end up back at the bunker door. Maybe this time, it'll be different. The water is red with blood. The shiny stones still guide your way, but taking the wrong path, you can pretty much always end up being dead. You retrace your steps. You see the writings again, calling you. Finally, you reach another open chamber. There's a savage here, praying to a giant head in the roots. It opens for a moment, once again calling out to you. You run into the mouth, barely making it as it closes behind you forever. The tight corridor between the roots leads to another door. You open it, and the music fades. You made it. You see the familiar grating of the tunnel. You pick up a shovel and dig up all the rubble blocking your way. You open the tunnel door, and the dream ends. You wake up in front of the lever. The blockaded door is now wide open. Once again, your dreams have directly affected reality. That lever you cleared only opens the floodgates behind you in case you wanted to leave, which would be most first-time playthroughs. As, like I said, that protagonist was not lying. You really only had one shot. Like I said, if you died in the dream, this door will stay closed forever, and you'd be forced to go back and burn the talking tree anyway. This is why this alternate path is so hard to get, because you basically have one chance at the very end of the game, and if you want to try again, you basically have to load up a new save on Darkwood. That, or you could edit save files, but don't do that, you fucking coward. But again, that doesn't matter anymore. You made it. The tunnel is right in front of you. Reaching the end, you see the number that's been following you the entire game, 21. You actually reach a sort of hub for the tunnel network, with what looks like a service tunnel running through it. You can reach tunnel 22, but although similarly to 21, it's full of collapses, making it impassable. Fortunately, there's a ladder here to take you to the surface. You emerge in the burnt remains of an old hideout. Only the oven is still standing. There's a backpack nearby where you can find a note.
The roots have made it impossible to dig further. Specialist tools will be needed if we are to go deeper. Observation. The roots of individual trees intertwine to create bundles or braids with a thickness of 120 centimeters. The ones we analyzed always grow towards the northeast. Taking into account the results from the dig sites from other regions, we can assume that the bundles come together in Sector 0. We have accumulated about 5 liters of the substance that flows through the roots. As expected, it has lost its shape-shifting abilities after being disconnected from the root, or from the stream to be exact.
Throughout the game, we've been speculating about the mechanisms of the forest. We've seen the white substance everywhere in the game, and this note just put all of that into context. You know how I said the doctor's notes were the biggest lore dumps of the game? While this note is much shorter, it contains massive confirmation of something we've been suspecting for a long time. The substance can shapeshift. All of Darkwood's creations are, in a sense, clones. Concepts imperfectly merged together and brought to life by the substance, creating the abominations we've been encountering all throughout the game. You can see it as early as Chapter 1. The very first example you could have found was a weird replica of the dry meadow hideout appearing in the old woods. Although back then you may not have even paid mind to it, thinking it was just a random building. The more obvious examples would be the mushroom granny and her house in the glade. All of those being copies of a normal woman who died in the swamp long ago, fused with the mushrooms. Another copy is the man in the tunnel between the chapters. He was the copy of a dead man we find in the swamp stairwell, presumably a villager who tried to leave through the tunnel just to be shot by the outsiders. There are many copies of that one man embedded into the walls of that tunnel, talking to you as you walk past, repeating the exact same dialogue. These copies are often made imperfect. For the granny and the man in the tunnel, this manifested as a weird softness to any copied object or person. But the imperfections can also be simple distortions, like with the snail, another copy. This time of the man at the junkyard cottage fused with his last meal, snails. You can see that there are actually multiple copies of the snail as you approach the cottage, all of them covered in the white substance, but stuck in place as unfinished caricatures that can't even move. Interestingly, these copies seem to come out much more accurately when the forest doesn't actually focus on copying the person exactly. After all the swamp's enemies are fusions of humans and various animals, as seen in the savage's ritual markings, but they're all devoid of any kind of identity. They're faceless predators out to kill you. Even if some seem to show emotion, they still resemble animals much more than actual sentient human beings. You can sometimes find some unfinished versions of enemies in the swamp, possibly defected like the copies of the snail, but even then there are way more proper working copies out there. Another important aspect of the substance is also the consciousness that it gives the copies. In the case of most characters, it just gives them the original's memories, like the snail believing that he's a person, or the mushroom granny talking to us about memories of her original copy's family. But in some cases, it can make the copy completely detached from the original, instead keeping only some attachments but not full memories or personality. One character that this pretty explicitly happens to is the Wolfman. Up to this point, you might have not even thought he was a copy, although there were a couple of indicators. Despite him never talking about his past, he has an insane obsession with the pretty lady, never being fulfilled until he could, you know, consume her. But the big thing connecting them was the distorted wedding ring you could find on his corpse. Real rings could only be found in two places, near the pretty lady, but also in the hunter's cabin on the hunter's corpse, which was completely overgrown in roots. The obvious connection to make is the hunter was in a relationship with the pretty lady, but at some point was killed, probably with a gun, considering the Wolfman's jacket has a bullet hole in it. The forest then merged him with the missing trophy, a wolf head, creating the furry that we came to know, leaving him obsessed with the pretty lady and keeping his hunting mannerisms, but changing him into a creature whose hatred of humanity overcame any other attachment. If anything, the forest distorted him so much that when he was made a copy, the biggest thing he wanted to hunt were other humans. Another copy you might remember is the trader. Him being fused with his mask and covered with shrooms is a pretty dead giveaway that he's a copy. And by looking at the items he drops, it becomes clear why he was so friendly towards us. He's a copy of us, the protagonist. He had both a copy of the journal and the Bunker 21 key, both slightly distorted as we discussed earlier. I mean, look, even his death pose is exactly the same as ours. It couldn't be any more on the nose. Even the talking tree, which we thought was everyone absorbed in the village, wasn't. It was a copy. We already knew that imprints of the swamp villagers were embedded into the tree somehow. You might even remember a piece of dialogue where you kick the tree and some white gooey substance leaks out, just for the piece you broke off to regrow immediately. These regenerative properties are something we also see in the human spiders, when they replicate by chucking torsos at you. But this also confirms the origin of the talking tree and why it grew so much faster than the rest of the forest. Not only did it grow on the bodies of the villagers, but the substance merged them with the tree, creating this weird fusion and accelerating its growth. All of this came from just one note, by the way, and there's still an entire area left here to explore. Looking around, the area you came out in seems to be some sort of clearing within the forest. There's even some sort of farmland, albeit flooded and broken up by huge bundles of roots. In the middle, you can see a scarecrow. Inspecting it further, you see it's dressed up in a hazmat suit for some reason. Going deeper in, you can see that this entire area has been deforested, as evidenced by the stumps left on the ground. This is probably the work of the outsiders, who needed to clear a path to the tunnel entrance. But there are still some trees left. And going further, you'll see a few bodies tied to them, dressed in what looks like the same hazmat suits. Only one tree doesn't have a body on it. Instead, there's some blood-stained rope on the ground. A ragged rope with traces of dried blood and a piece of hazmat suit glued to it. Whoever was tied here must have been able to escape. There's also a discarded protective boot that you can find a little bit further away. You can also find another abandoned hideout. There's corpses everywhere, some holding military gear, some belonging to savages with only rope in their inventory. This camp must have belonged to the outsiders, also evidenced by sample jars and machinery connected up to the trees, with what looks like light bulbs on one of the trunks. It really does look like the doctor might have been onto something with his electricity theory after all.
Step 1. Insert light bulbs into a tree. Step 2.
Going inside the hideout, you'll see more remnants of the campsite, as well as the familiar oven. Unfortunately, inspecting it, you'll see it's completely destroyed. A destroyed oven. The jar with the protective substance lies shattered on the ground. There must have been a fight here, a surprise attack, judging by the, half-eaten sandwich on the table. By now, you might remember the very first journal entry you got. I don't remember anything since the attack on our camp. This is our camp. This is where your entire story started. The corpses you found around here used to be your fellow soldiers. That rope you found had your blood on it. You were left to die tied up to that tree just like them. How you escaped is unclear. All that matters is that you somehow managed to outrun the savages and in the end make it back here. The entry also mentions changing your clothes. Somehow I'm wearing a coat, so I must have changed my clothes on the way here. That hazmat suit left on the scarecrow and the protective boot used to belong to you. You probably swapped the clothes to blend in with the population better, as the hazard suit was damaged and would be instantly recognized by villagers. As sad as it might be to see your camp destroyed and mission failed, you can still get out yourself and survive. Before doing so, you can find one more note inside the hideout in a black room.
The structure resembles a honeycomb. The surface of particular cells varies from 80 to as many as 360 square kilometers. The cells gradually divide into smaller ones. It can be assumed that with time, the forest will achieve a homogeneous form. Trees grow with remarkable regularity, forming walls with the average thickness of 50 meters. The distances between trunks are never higher than 10 centimeters. According to preliminary analysis, only 15% of the total volume consists of actual trees, although this figure is hard to verify.
This note seems to just be more research about the forest. The interesting part is right at the end when he says only about 15% of the Darkwood's forest is actually made of real trees. The rest is presumably just replicas made by the substance. This is another huge reveal because it explains why the forest could spread and grow so fast, instead of just being, you know, a spooky, unexplained, scary thing. This is something I really like about Darkwood, which I mentioned near the beginning of the video. Everything ends up making sense as long as you spend the time to actually uncover it. I totally get the aspect of horror and suspense, you know, the thing you can't see is so scary because your mind has to, you know, make up the pictures. Insert the Batman quote here.
And you always fear what you don't understand.
I'm afraid.
You can also find a couple more experimentation sites behind the camp, all of them seemingly focused on hooking up electrodes to roots. This and the previous experiment would suggest that the outsiders must have been suspecting that the substance could actually conduct electricity. Thinking about it now, if the forest could manipulate electricity through its roots, that could explain how seemingly broken radios would suddenly come to life, or how lights in our hideout would suddenly turn on and off. Again, yet another horror trope that happens in basically any spooky horror game, but in Darkwood there's a legitimate reason explained behind it. There's nothing more to be found in the hideout. The only thing left to do is to go further and hopefully leave the forest for good. There's a small building you can find with a barricade blocking the door. Removing the barricade lets you through just to spit you out on the road home. The same road that if you burnt down the tree. This is really weird because you might remember finding the journal page of the doctor ripped out in his camp near the radio tower, and it mentioned this. The trip will be exceptionally long. We're taking one of the longest tunnels. It almost reaches to the last zone. This means that the camp must be very, very deep in the forest. So how is it possible that there's a convenient exit right here? The forest should be at its most dangerous after all. But for now, that doesn't matter. Maybe it's just a coincidence. Before going to the epilogue, you can walk back on the footpath that would normally lead you here if you burnt the talking tree. Obviously, the tree is still standing, and you'll see the three standing before it with their signature bell audible in the ambience. The three are staring at the tree. They pay no attention to me. Once again confirming their ties to the tree and the person it copied. You can also approach the tree itself. In the shadows, I notice the pulsating vastness of the gigantic tree trunk. In the distance above the roots, I see the destroyed roofs of the flooded village. The area is shrouded in almost complete silence.
You've spared us.
The voice is coming from between the dark boughs, but I can't see its owner.
This road will lead you home. Nothing will stand.
And so, like the main ending where you burnt down the tree, you can go home. We've managed to spare the tree, but likely condemning the cripple to death. So again, even though this could be seen as the more moral option, someone still gets punished by your hand. Now, everything ahead is pretty much the exact same as the original ending. So I think it'd be a good idea now to start nitpicking things that just are wrong with it. For example, your camp was supposed to be very deep in the forest, yet the nearest town is only 25 kilometers away. You even remember the trader telling you all roads lead deeper into the woods. All the roads. Then you start to notice it. You walk into town again, the same things play out. The woman feeding the birds, but your neighbor doesn't even comment on your ghoulish appearance, not to mention your scarecrow outfit. What you thought was just normal Polish background ambience now starts to sound like screams. And how can your character talk again? The only way he was ever able to communicate was by nodding or shaking his head. The worms you used to find everywhere in the swamp cover the ground next to one of the trash cans. The buildings stretch on forever, looking exactly the same. If you choose to run up or down the map, you'll notice that the buildings just start to repeat themselves. Every building is an exact copy. You go inside and walk down to the basement. You take a turn just to find mushrooms growing in one of the corridors. The same ones you injected into yourself to attune more with the forest. Through the door next to it, you can see something moving. You can only see bits through the bars, but it looks like A chomper? Despite this, you go deeper, just like how you've done in the entire game. Every door is locked until you reach the last room. It looks like a pantry, having potatoes and even a nice jar of jam labeled Zemic? God, I hope I said that right. There's also a radio that you can switch on. It mostly just plays weird variations of static, but changing the frequency one too many times and it starts to emit the same noise you heard back with the swamp radios. It starts talking to you. After which, all the lights go out. You start going back, and as you do, hear loud thumps, like something is hitting a wooden box. You should probably get out. Walking back to the ground floor, you start feeling more tired. Something is drawing you back to your flat. But that itch on the back of your head, that feeling of unease, it won't let go. You start trying to open doors, any doors, just to find some kind of side content. Predictably, they're all closed. But after you walk back, one of them opens slightly.
You're waking my kids!
A pissed off mother yells at you. You peek inside just to see the baby is actually a fetus lying on the ground. The same fetus that we would have dreams of in chapter 1.
What is that? Is that a fetus?
You start fearing the worst. Despite this, you continue on to your apartment. You go up the stairs and through the hallway, but you notice some cracks in the wall. Peeking through, you can't make out anything at first, but then your vision clears up and you see a pulsating, fleshy growth, along with a legion of chompers. The light gives out and the monsters disappear, but now you know that there's something definitely wrong. But still, the urge to go to sleep is incredibly strong, but you manage to pass your apartment and continue down the hallway until you realize that every door leads to your apartment. You fight the compulsion to just give up and rest. You move along the hallway until it devolves into a never-ending mess of roots. You give in and go back to your apartment. It seems like the same ending is going to play out. You take off your coat and you get to see your dog again. You're happy, but you know this isn't real. You remember something you were told long ago, way back when you thought Bunker 21 would lead you out. When you entered the Silent Forest, a sleeper told you this.
Hey there, friend. In the last hideout, look for an exit beneath the floor.
Back then, it made no sense, but finally you see it. You drag away the furniture, revealing bundles of roots infiltrating your home. But this isn't enough. They're growing out of the floor panels. To get rid of them, you'll have to go deeper. You can take off the rug and try to remove the flooring, but you'll need tools for that. You go to the kitchen, and instead of cooking delicious soup, you check the cupboard, and under the sink you find a screwdriver. Once again, you go back into the living room. You see that your dog has vanished. The illusion is starting to shatter. You start removing floorboards, one by one. You uncover pulsating roots. As the calming ambience changes to that uncertain tone of the night that you're so used to hearing. You move onto the corridor. You hear a heartbeat in the background. The network of roots spans your entire apartment, and they all converge in your bedroom. You enter and remove the floor inside. They all lead to your bed. This was always a trap. You examine your bed, but this time, instead of sleeping, you look closer. Fighting off sleepiness with difficulty, I lean over the bed. The springs creak noisily under the weight of my hand. As I cast my glance on the light brown construction from plywood, I notice familiar features. They are elongated and arched. I can still smell the fresh sheets and the pleasant warmth of the quilt. You look under the bed. I feel a gentle draft coming from the dark gap between the bed and the floor. You reach underneath. My fingertips brush a thin layer of dust, coldness, moisture. I'm touching something rough, but my arm is too short to catch it. I think I need to move the bed. You drag the bed away to reveal a hole in the ground. You remove more flooring to be able to reach inside, and finally, you can enter. Like any Rust character, you wake up completely naked, lying on the floor made out of entwined roots. Back inside the forest, or more accurately, underneath the forest. You're surrounded by other people, all of them naked and sleeping. Anytime you saw those huge open ravines pulsating with roots, that was the heart of the forest, and now you're here. It's obvious that when you went to escape the forest, you actually passed out and became a sleeper. Now, I know you're all gonna rush to the comments and say, oh my god, look, he made another all-in-the-head game, but the difference is the events of this game did actually happen. The only difference being when you actually left the Darkwood and made it to the town, the forest had a countermeasure and turned you into a sleeper, dragging you to its center. Even though you're naked, you can actually see the Scarecrow outfit near your character. So the game did happen. It was just the Soviet bloc part that was a dream sequence. You can go up and inspect any of the sleepers around you. The man is fast asleep. He's smiling. He's hugging his knees with skinny, dirty arms. A swarm of flies is covering a black sore on his back. You can try to wake him up, but it's no use. The man doesn't react. I'm unable to wake him from his slumber. You can follow the trail of your own clothes back to the wall of the chamber. The steep slope blocks the way ahead. There are some tunnels at its base. The whole area looks more like a crater than anything else. You can examine a tunnel in the wall, seemingly the one that got you through. It's a meter-wide tunnel covered with a slimy membrane. Further inside, I can see pulsating growths blocking the way ahead. I won't be able to pass through this way. It looks like it closed itself off behind you once you entered. In fact, you may remember this being foreshadowed in the dream back at the radio tower basement. You literally go into a gigantic mouth that closes itself behind you to finish the dream. You literally led yourself into the mouth of the forest in hopes to get out. Darkwood has always gave you multiple ways to approach something, but here you have no choice except to go deeper down into the chamber. You can interact with another sleeper, this time a woman muttering through her sleep. Dirty, clumped hair covers the woman's face. She's murmuring in her sleep, clutching a rag doll filled with straw.
Now the moon has faded. The sleep stole over my doll. Your eyes.
You can't wake her up. As you move further in, more and more roots start emerging from the ground. They're so close to the surface, you can feel them just by walking. I'm at the bottom of a huge valley. I feel the dry, dusty earth pulsating under my feet. Soon, the roots overtake completely. There's no ground to speak of anymore. Both the walls and the floor are entirely made out of roots. You see many more different figures lying on the ground. Their old, weathered clothes lying discarded nearby. Its face is covered in mud and sticks. It clutches a shiny stone in its hand. Right next to the figure, you can find a shiny stone. Items that have accompanied you throughout your journey in the forest and have been great value to traders. But there's always been something strange about them. You could see that both savages and villagers seem to hold them in high regard, going so far as to worship them and put them into shrines. And like I said, traders would give you a lot of rep for them. Seeing them here confirms that they are definitely somehow connected with the forest. Moving forward, you can see a huge chamber splitting off from the path, containing even more sleepers. It hums something quietly in its sleep, swaying to the rhythm of a simple melody. The figure speaks to someone in its sleep, squeezing an old man's photo in its hand. The figure is talking in its sleep, moving its hand as if caressing someone with affection. Probably the same way we'd caress our wife in one of the dreams. This sleeping man looks like a skeleton coated in skin. He smiles widely. The emaciated figure sleeps soundly, embracing the remains of a child. The figure sleeps on a muddy ground, resting its head on the chest of a skeleton next to it. It clutches a muddy brass cross in both hands, repeating some incomprehensible words in its sleep. I hear a faint whisper.
Stashik, my little Stashik. Sleep, Stashik, sleep.
None of them can be woken up despite your best efforts. Even if you wanted to use force, your entire inventory has been stripped from you. Going back to the main path, you walk alongside the root walls and more sleepers. They're asleep. They seem happy. Even though they're emaciated and dirty, some of them lie dead. All of these people likely suffered a fate similar to yours. They were all drawn here in one way or another. Maybe they were trying to escape, maybe just like the snail and the savages, they were called here by the voice. You can even remember the cripple back at the swamp village talking about people walking on the road blocked by the talking tree. This is probably where they were heading, and probably why the savages were also trying to enter the tunnels. They were being called here, but couldn't access the road home after the talking tree blocked it. The ones that made it were deceived by comfortable dreams, just like how the forest tried to do the same with you. The other sleepers gave into the forest, forced into a deep sleep, never to wake up as they starved to death, only to be consumed by the roots that surround them. By the look of it, you're the only character that's managed to resist. To move further, you have to walk across a trunk bridging the gap between the root platforms. As you step on it, you can look down into the canyon, but there's no dark earth or rock at the bottom. Instead, you see something moving. Fleshy growths are spread out all the way under the roots, constantly pulsating. You continue on. Soon you see a bright glow in the next chamber. A pleasant warmth washes over me. Once you enter, you can see its source, a huge white ball seeping substance. This is the heart of the forest. This is the being. I'm standing in front of an enormous being. I feel an overwhelming, soothing feeling of security and happiness. The vast valley at the bottom of which I stand curves upwards, closing over my head. The rust of distant trees turns into a single, silent murmur. I feel I'm coming home, to my flat, to my room with a window and a bed. Something like a sound, continuous and low, is coming my way. In the depth of the pulsating space surrounding me, I can see vague shapes. Their outline blurs and fades away every time I try to focus on them. Suddenly, the sound envelops me, only to instantly disappear a moment later. I can feel someone's presence far above me. I'm drowning in an illuminating, pulsating whiteness. I squeeze my eyes shut, but the vast brightness continues to blind me. The silent grunt grows stronger with every moment. It stratifies into an unlimited number of abstract, incomprehensible sounds, only to combine into a distant, wailing voice. My eyes fill up with tears. My hands are trembling. The ever-present whiteness blinds me. It explodes with brightness once more, and then starts vibrating. Suddenly, I realize that the pleasant feeling of warmth has been replaced by coldness. The coldness of the void that surrounds me. I feel a heat emanating from the being. I sense my pulse slowing down. A calmness. I want to rest. Come back home. To my bed. I want to lie down. To fall asleep. I don't want to do it. Still, my hand pushes the being away. The warmth that was emanating from it disappears, replaced by piercing coldness. The being is the heart of Darkwood. All of its roots originate from it and spread out, covering the entire region. This is also what's been talking back to you all this time, through the radio, but also through your dreams. Looking back on them now, they revealed a lot of the forest's nature, even if we don't have the full context to understand it back then. The final dream scene in the radio tower bunker especially revealed a lot more if you were paying attention. That tree you could find with bloody scraps attached to it was a reference to a tree that you were tied to and managed to escape. Every time you strayed from the main path, you would also find pieces of your apartment, just to have someone tell you that you're lost. The being was telling you that you're never really going back there. And to be fair, you were literally told this on day one by none other than a clone of yourself. All roads only lead deeper into the woods. If the trader knew this, then it's likely you too knew it at some point. But ever since you're injected with essence by the doctor, you were under the being's control to some extent. Bunker 21, the talking tree, even the radio tower, they were all bait for your desperation to get out. The being led you into its trap like so many others. And now, even though you're awake, you can't get out. The tunnel you came in through closed behind you, and the root walls are too steep to climb on your own. Exploring around the being chamber, you can see some savages are actually still awake, bowing before the being, worshipping it. They're probably so far gone that they didn't even need to be put to sleep. You can also find a familiar face among the sleepers. The Doctor, now in his full-blown savage form. Weirdly enough, though, he's here even if you killed him, which, to be fair, does bring into question, is the entire game all in their head? But I really doubt it, because again, you can find your character's clothes when you wake up here. The events of the game did happen. This could be just a continuity error, or more likely, he was revived by the substance. We already know that the substance has insane life-altering properties, like making your blood acidic or emitting such a scream that you'd scare all the local wildlife. So it wouldn't be too implausible to think the Doctor was found, dragged down here, and then revived just so he could be another food source for the being. Going to an adjacent corridor, you can find another named sleeper, Marciek. The man mumbles in his sleep. He's emaciated and dirty, but his face is radiant and calm. He clutches a rusty object covered with old beads. Some weapon? The man is talking in his sleep. These are only snippets of sentences, single words spoken gently and slowly. It's hard to find any meaning in them. You can try to push him to wake him up. Leave. Without opening his eyes, the man clumsily waves his hand at me, then covers his head with it and freezes. He's in a deep trance like the others, but instead of trying to wake him up, you can try to take what he's desperately holding onto. Leave. The man waves his hand again. This time he grabs my arm. Without opening his eyes, he turns his head towards me. I recognize him. He's one of us. Marciek is actually a name that appeared way back in the game. Back in the old woods hideout, you could find a note about someone named Marciek going insane and running off into the woods with a flamethrower. You know what you need to do now. You can try to snatch the weapon from Marciek, but he's obsessed with it.
Leave! Can you fucking hear me? I won't let you take her!
The man clenches his teeth with the fury of a maniac. Saliva flows from his mouth.
It's hurting her! You will tear her arms out!
But you have a purpose now. You might not be able to leave, but that doesn't mean you're just going to give up. You need that flamethrower.
Don't leave her. No!
So you punch Marciek and take it. As you walk towards the being, he calls out to you.
I beg of you, give her to me.
He starts chasing you, but he's so emaciated and starved, he basically has no chance of catching up to you.
What are you doing? Give her back.
Sleepers start waking up and calling out to you. The being knows what's about to happen, but it can't stop you anymore.
What are you doing? What are you doing? Leave us alone. Time lost. You'll kill us.
But you've accepted that already. There was never a way out. You fire the flamethrower. The being immediately catches on fire. It screams, filling the chamber. Every sleeper around you starts waking up and rushes at you, trying to stop you. Almost like the white blood cells dealing with a foreign body. But it's too late. The being's white shell burns away, revealing a fleshy mass beneath it. Even its appearance was most likely an illusion. As everything burns around you, you look desperately for an exit. But the option was never there. You could never get out. You were doomed from the start. You make peace with yourself because at least now, Darkwood will burn away alongside you. A great fire consumed the woods for a couple of days, gradually claiming many of its inhabitants. The fire consumed the last road leading to the heart of the woods. This is the final true conclusion to one of my favorite games of all time.
Yummers.
There's no Marvel post-credit scene where it's like, oh, look, suddenly you're alive, and you got the wholesome 100 good ending. An ending like that wouldn't fit Darkwood. You might remember me talking about how there's no good choices in the game. The fate of the protagonist is one of those choices. You can't survive Darkwood no matter what you do. What choices you make, all roads lead to the same place. You always die. Either turning into a sleeper and being slowly consumed by the tree, or choosing to go out on your own terms and taking the infection with you. And there's definitely a certain hopelessness that comes with this realization. One that no game could ever replicate for me since playing Darkwood. Like, your choices, despite being impactful, could never really help you. The only difference they made is shaping the world that you leave behind. After you finish the game, you get some end cards talking about the fates of the characters you left behind. These adapt to every major decision you've made throughout the game, meaning that there are easily multiple pages worth of variations as to what happens to them. If I were to cover every single one, the video would probably get another hour in runtime, and holy shit, this video is already way too long, so I'll keep it brief and only talk about the most interesting ones. Generally, going to sleep in your apartment and giving up to the being doesn't change much for the characters. You were basically a passerby without being a big impact on the world. That is, of course, your finger slipped on accident. I promise it did. I did not mean to shoot that child. Despite the fact that Darkwood has no clear good endings, this one, called Bliss, can be considered the worst one. You end up being deceived by the being. You waste away in a comfortable dream, and overall, you change nothing. The woods keep stagnating, but at least you got to rest, I guess. Most characters just continue on living, although some of them do end up getting some form of conclusion to their story. If you follow the musician's path and then kill both of his parents and the pretty lady, he ends up moving in with the chicken lady, who now tends to him like she used to tend to her sister. I mean, to be fair, that is a pretty wholesome ending, as long as you skip over, you know, all the murder you had to do to get this. Alternatively, if he comes with you to the swamp and you don't mutate him by feeding him shrooms, he actually manages to find his way into the bunker tunnels. The boy with the violin waited many weeks for the stranger to return. One day, the trapdoor leading to the underground opened once again. The little boy traveled through the tunnels, and to his great despair, he had to leave his trusty old violin behind him. A similar thing happens to Marcinek. If you never interact with him, he permanently moves in with the Mushroom Granny. The Granny even recovers some of her original's memories, and generally they probably get the happiest ending out of anyone in the game. It also turns out that bringing the child back to the Elephant Mother was a very blatant bad karma choice, since he just ends up being locked in the room forever and the Granny just wastes away. The game even confirms that the Elephant Mother was going insane, since she starts hearing Marcinek's voice in the woods if you don't bring him back. Which, as we already know, is the being calling out to trap people in the valley. If you leave the tree alive, the cripple goes insane, which isn't really surprising, considering he's got, 20 schizophrenic Polish villagers yapping above his head all day. And interestingly enough, you can also have a unique ending if you kill every single character in the game. From then on, wooden crosses covered with a coat and a hat started appearing in the woods. They were usually accompanied by 3 black beakless dead crows. The inhabitants of the woods believed these symbols protected them from a scarecrow lurking between the trees, silently taking the lives of everyone he encountered. The other ending, meanwhile, affects every character in the game. After all, you destroy the forest by completely burning up the being. This ending is kind of better since you do free everyone stuck in the Darkwood, or more than likely kill them, because in this ending, 90% of all characters, no matter how you interacted with them, straight up die. There's only a couple that actually end up surviving in this ending. If you didn't bring Marsonek back, he manages to run away to the swamp and survives the fire, just to go back to his family, who burnt down along with their cottage. Rick Grimes in The Walking Dead be like, we can all live together. I'll live. If you fail the train wreck dream, the doctor will apparently survive somewhere deep in the woods. He'll still obviously end up going completely insane though, so unfortunately, he can truly never get a good ending. If you take any other path, he'll burn along with the being, since we can find him in the chamber. Although, that being said, I swear there has to be some kind of bug, because he somehow appears there every time, even if he's killed in Chapter 1, no matter what path you take with him. The musician also survives if you didn't kill the Sow. He manages to find the entrance to Bunker 21 and hides out the fire inside. And lastly, the Wolfman just disappears.
Dis-a-fucking-peer.
It's intentionally left unclear, presumably so furries wouldn't boycott the game if he was killed off. There's also the villagers from Chapter 1 that survive if you spare the Sow, but honestly, who cares? I'm not skipping a hotbar upgrade just to get the good ending. There's also, of course, an ending line if you genocide everyone in the forest. And the vagabond from outside the woods, the monster in a scarecrow's disguise, who, due to reasons only known to himself, killed everyone who crossed him. Even after the endings, which honestly do wrap up the game pretty well, there's one more thing that stays mostly unexplained: the being. We know how it works in terms of substance and the forest it created, but apart from that, there's not really much said about it. We kind of just, set it on fire. This is where we do a bit of a game theory, because even though there's loads of notes around the game, like this is why the video is so long, because I went into agonizing detail to find and explain every single bit of lore. There's not a single note or character that gives a bunch of lore, and they've purposely kept it ambiguous. I'd love to meet a character that goes, oh, Lamau, it came from Uranus, the planet, XD. It seems like its existence is a secret, even to the outsiders. But there's one item in the game that actually connects the being back to its origins. Back in the swamp village inside the original Granny's house, we could find some paintings. All of them were of flowers, except for one, which shows a white ball of light moving across the sky. Obviously, this is all a bit of a game theory, but it's very likely that this is a painting of the being. This would suggest that it's not a native part of our world, but rather extraterrestrial. And it collided with the Earth the same year the painting is dated, 1975. Knowing this, we can even speculate that the shiny stones could be shards of the being that split off when it impacted into the ground. I do say speculate, but this was literally confirmed by the devs in a Reddit AMA, so yeah, that wasn't even really a theory to begin with. I kind of just stole it from Reddit. Funnily enough, that pile of rubble you dug into the first time when you went into Bunker 21 was probably the closest you ever were to escaping. That's because the bunker tunnel only leads deeper in, so this cave was in fact the way back that collapsed under the pressure of the roots. Keep in mind as well, the dream in your apartment, there was a TV broadcast talking about stars falling from the sky and falling into the palm of your hand, the same shiny stones that you'd pick up. I believe when the being impacted into the planet, it did hit the forest of Darkwood. And because we know the main way it functions is by copying and replicating everything around it, it assimilated the forest, so only around 10 to 20% of the actual forest was real. And then after the forest, it moved on to replicating everything around the forest, including the homes, people, and animals. But during this assimilation, something went wrong. The closer you get to the center of the Darkwood, the more corrupted everything is around it. From stray dogs to big dogs to chompers to human centipedes.
Then Gandalf the Grey and Gandalf the White.
The being is an alien entity. I mean, that's pretty apparent. And like most animals, it just wanted to survive. It was making the forest even bigger. It was seemingly bringing people back from the dead. But these people probably never would have died if the being never landed on the earth in the first place. And on top of that as well, an animal needs food. Hence why it drew so many people to the center to turn them into sleepers, giving them a blissful dream of their best fantasies. But in exchange, slowly killing them, making them fall into a coma until they were basically just a shriveled up corpse with no energy left. If anything, it draws parallels to the Zone in the 2018 film Annihilation. This ever-expanding zone that didn't have any malicious intent, but still caused mass death and devastation to everyone inside it. It couldn't be understood, it was completely alien, and if it went unchecked, it would have definitely consumed most of the planet. The reason why the plague affected people so differently is because it was an alien trying to understand how bodies worked. Maybe it was infecting them to weaken them so there'd be a better food source. Maybe the only reason some turn into chompers is because of a deep-rooted hatred, especially within the villagers, and you can see many of them turning into chompers, mostly because there is a huge food shortage. And some are even hinted to turning into cannibals just to survive. If it really does want to beckon people closer to the center so they can be broken down and used as a food source, why is getting to the center so difficult? The talking tree, for example, directly blocks the way to get to the being, but that is a creation of the being itself. I don't think it's a malevolent entity with a huge grand plan. I just think it's something that's confused and lost. I don't even think it has the ability to have a conscience apart from just basic survival instincts. All it really wants to do is feed, and by putting people into a blissful trance in the process, well, that serves both parties. Most people that are called to the being aren't actually called by the being itself, but more a placeholder. With the doctor, it was his daughter, and for many people in the game, it's a loved one that they haven't seen in a long time, either because they died or got cut off from the woods. The being itself is completely incapable of any kind of speech, only being able to communicate through radios, and most of the time it makes no sense, and its basic dialogue more like echoes of people that it previously killed and assimilated, almost as if it has no real free thought of its own. And I think that's the point of the being. It's not meant to be something that's understood. It's simply an invader in the planet that's just doing its best to survive, creating honey-like comb structures and luring people to the center so it can feed off them. The government knew about this for a while, and thankfully they were able to cordon off the darkwood so it didn't spread any further.
Stop!
But it really does bring to question what would happen if the being went unchecked. It would probably start replicating inorganic structures as well. We already saw that the hideouts were being replicated, so it wouldn't be too much of a stretch to say that it would start replicating entire block buildings. And that might have actually happened if you weren't there to burn down the being and the entirety of the forest. If anything, it reminds me of the game Prey that came out in 2017. Spoiler alert, during that game you explored a space station while having to deal with this alien pathogen called the Typhon. But you actually later found out that the Typhon were able to spread to Earth and pretty much contaminate the entire planet. But to be fair, in Prey, there was no Polish man with a flamethrower, so... And with that, the game is pretty much done. There's really nothing more to talk about. I could sit here for hours just rambling on about the being and its true intentions, but again, the devs have kept that purposely vague. And I do stand by the theory that the being is not something malevolent, it just wants to survive. Also, while probably trying to understand the planet that it's inhabited. One thing I do want to talk about more in the game is cut content. While making this video, I reached out to the devs regarding some technical stuff relating to the game. One of those things was getting access to the dev mode to let us record footage easier. By easier, I mean we wouldn't have to replay 7 hours of footage to get a single line of dialogue. Your mother. The dev mode also lets you spawn any item in the entire game, including a bunch that never made it to the final release. Some of these items, I can totally understand why they were cut, because they are just absolutely game-breaking. An interesting cut item is the noise law, which is kind of an obvious mechanic for any survival horror. With noise laws, you'd be able to precision target where you want to bait an enemy. You might ask, why am I putting this completely normal item in the very obviously joke section? Well, the item is unfinished, and for some reason, this is the placeholder sound it plays. What's even better, there's more variations of this sound. Like they genuinely went the extra mile for a fart joke. This is exactly what I mean by peak game design. To go with this, you also get a fart pillow, which would no doubt be the most broken item in the game if it were added, so I understand why they tried to keep this amazing power contained. There's also a kebab, which instantly restores you to full health, which is only fair considering Acid Wizard apparently lived off kebabs for a long time while working on Darkwood. And to finish it off, there's a straight-up acid pill in the game. Get it? Because Acid Wizard Studio.
This is not funny, Pyro. Death to inflation form.
I was really hesitant on taking this, especially because in another game I covered, Cruelty Squad, you could take pills and 9 times out of 10, it would just end up breaking the game in a really bad way, like shrinking you down so you couldn't complete levels, or flipping the world upside down so you got stuck in a single room. But this pill gives you insane stat buffs for an amount of time that's not really long enough for me to bother measuring. And also, on top of that, makes you die in one hit. So if this was a legit item in the game, I imagine it was probably used as some kind of like glass cannon speedrun. There is one more thing in the game that happens much earlier, but I chose to ignore it until now. Back at the beginning, when you started the game, you might remember the option to tick something marked as Indiegogo content. So this doesn't actually impact the game at all, apart from putting an additional dream into the pool. You'll wake up in a hallway and you can only go to a single open door. Walking in, you can see a small apartment along with 3 desks and some sick multi-monitor PC setups. This is the creator's office dream, a recreation of the Acid Wizard Studios office. You can find a lot of pictures lying around, photos of the devs, their families, and lots of other people associated with Darkwood's production, random food items, and what even looks like concept art. As for the Indiegogo part of the dream, there's a book you have to find to be able to exit the dream, which serves as a thank you to all of Darkwood's supporters. It's a very cool way of thanking the community, and it's interesting seeing the devs' office remade in their own game. There's also a couple of funny bits in the dream, thanks to the protagonist commenting on what he sees, like him not being able to recognize a modern electric stove because those didn't exist back in 1987. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can find here that would have me reading all the text out on screen, but it's definitely worth checking out yourself. More on the devs themselves, they are genuinely great people. I met up with them to interview them for this video, and they've been nothing but helpful with basically anything we asked about. And you can still see their dedication to Darkwood. Even though they have talked about lore a couple of times on various AMAs, they never give out anything outright to preserve the mystery around the game. This was also the case with our interview, and also the reason why I mark out everything lore-wise as a theory rather than fact. This air of mystery is integral to Darkwood's atmosphere and unique feel, and I can only respect the developers for keeping it up after so many years. So you might wonder what's next for them. Since Darkwood, they've released another game, Soccer Kids, which is described as a game about soccer made by people who suck at playing soccer. You suck! The game's in early access right now on Steam for free, and it looks pretty good. It's got a lot of good reviews when it came out, but obviously there's no way I can sugarcoat it. This is the furthest away from Darkwood you could ever get. It's also set in 90s Poland. Darkwood was obviously a huge success for Acid Wizard, but also it took a huge toll on them, as the project overtook their personal lives while they were working on it.
The production process was like really arduous for us. It was long. It was 5 years. A lot of it was crunch. We made a lot of promises during our crowdfunding campaign, and it was just too much for 3 guys to handle, you know?
Yeah. Finishing the project was for sure like the most stressful thing. And pressure, yeah, we made so many promises after the campaign, so it was hard to do it
to fulfill everything.
Yeah, as good as we said it will be.
Since releasing Soccer Kids, they've gone on a hiatus from game design. And honestly, they definitely deserve a break. They've made what can genuinely only be called a masterpiece, and I can only wish them well for the future. And again, I really want to thank the devs for both the help they provided with the video and for making such a unique and frankly insane game. I really don't think there's a single game out there that can replicate the experience of Darkwood.
So what would you think like the main legacy of Darkwood is now? Because it's obviously been cemented as like a really successful game. Like, I mean, there's so many video essays talking about it, people that have beat me to it. But, you know, like, what would you think is going to happen with the game going ahead?
That's a very hard question for me. I don't know how to answer the legacy part, because I don't know. I think I'm not the right person to answer this. It's up to other people to answer it.
Like you said, many people are like making video essays about it, and it's like very cool for us to watch it, that they are like spending their time to analyze it, and like they treat it with a much respect, and it's very cool for us. This game is a niche game. Everyone who wants to play it played it already, but all the time it's changing. Like the game is
like more people are finding the game.
Yeah, and it's like very shocking. It's really awesome to have these people who are like really fan of this game, and they're like making, for example, Wikipedia or some additional stuff.
Admins on the wiki page of Darkwood. They met there, and they formed a relationship, and they got married. And she moved in from the USA, to Finland.
Where they got married over Darkwood.
Yeah,
that's lit.
Yeah,
it's a real story.
What happens to Darkwood is that I think we will continue developing the world. Maybe not ourselves, but with cooperation with some very talented people in other media. What Darkwood is unique is that it's a niche within a niche. It's like a horror, but it's also pixelated, it's retro, it's from a top-down perspective. And I think it's like one of the first games which kind of utilize this perspective to have this effect. So when a lot of people see it, and you can see on the reviews on Steam and whatnot, that people, say that, hey, I saw this game, I didn't believe that it could be so atmospheric and scary, but then I tried it, and indeed it's really fucking scary. So I would really like for other games to kind of maybe delve into it further, because I don't think I think there's a lot more to say, a lot more things to be said in this perspective.
Yeah. Shit, that's everything. Fuck.
So all in all, that is Darkwood, one of the best games I've ever experienced. Top-down games just don't do it for me. I just think they're bedtime. But a game like that has immersed me and just done such a fantastic job at keeping me engaged throughout. I know there have been like a billion video essays on this game. I swear there's like another one every single month. It was so difficult to try to add anything that other people didn't do because they did amazing jobs. That's why I came out here in the middle of Sweden in the snow, despite the fact that there is no snow in Darkwood whatsoever. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. That's it. Go buy the game. It's really good.
Polub is subscribing.